I guess the next thing I'd like to think about, though, is Mumbo and Humbawamba. Basically, why is Mumbo associated to the devil in certain parts of Banjo-Tooie in this case? So, what comes up to mind is that in Witchy World, for example, Mumbo's hut has horns on it and is placed in the Inferno, like the hell section of Witchy World. So, Mumbo's hut usually has different sort of thematic decorations depending on where it is. So could just be seen as one more thematic issue. It's in the fairground ride that mimics the Inferno, so it's shaped like a devil's skull, a devil's head. However, Mumbo is also in the Hell section of Hailfire Peaks. And I mean the Hell section because Mumbo's skull is in the Fire section of Hailfire Peaks, and Humber's hut is on the Ice and Snow section. So they're divided in this sort of way as well. But the thing is, Hailfire Peaks, like Hailfire, is obviously a pun on Hellfire. It also sort of echoes the idea of hell, inferno. It sort of suggests that the fiery side of Hailfire Peaks is infernal or hellish in some way. Right? There are imps flying around, if I remember correctly. So there is a little bit of that sort of hell imagery. Anyway, so then Mumbo's hut, therefore, in the same game, is placed in areas that resonate with hell, fiery inferno, twice. And okay, so that's not a lot exactly, but there are other things that bother me, which is, for example, Mumbo is given a doppelganger in Cloud Cuckoo Land, and this doppelganger is evil. So Mumbo is given a sort of evil counterpart, which makes it seem like there is a sort of evil hidden within Mumbo. It makes Mumbo seem more threatening, right? You enter into Mumbo's hut, he seems like the usual Mumbo, but suddenly a sort of evil force with shining eyes awakens within him. And this never happens to Humber. Like Humber, I don't think is ever associated to evil or hell in this way. So it makes me wonder whether there is some sort of association between Mumbo and hell or evil. There are other things, material things that we could refer to. One is that Mumbo himself, of course, has a skull for a head. And what that, implies is death, usually, right? Skulls usually resonate with death, like the skulls on pirate flags or things like that, Like a person with a skull for a head is similar to the Grim Reaper or to just death itself, the devil. So in that way, he also sort of feels like a character that is more in resonance with death and a sort of and darkness, evil in some way. And finally, I would also say that Mumbo was originally Grunty's personal shaman or Grunty's teacher or something like that, according to the manuals somewhere. So Mumbo originally belonged to the evil side, right? If this were like a movie that's divided into like the evil characters and the good characters, Grunty would belong to the evil side of the cast, and Mumbo used to belong to that side. So Mumbo comes from the darkness, from the evil side, but has come round as sort of, has sort of joined the good side or something. Within the archetypes of the game, of course. It doesn't necessarily mean that one side is evil and the other one is good, but that's how it's being presented and what it signifies symbolically. So Mumbo comes from the symbolic evil, you could say, right? And not only that, but according to the story, Grunty was sort of angry with him or something. This might be interesting to research. I'm actually going to look this up. Okay, I'm actually going to read the manual thing because I think it's interesting. So Mumbo Jumbo's character description in the Banjo-Kazooie manual says that he is a former teacher of Gruntilda's. This mysterious shaman was betrayed by his pupil, so by Gruntilda, before he could prevent her from putting his magic to bad use. Anyway, yeah, sort of improvising here. But anyway, so yes, he was betrayed by his pupil before he could prevent her from putting his magic to bad use. Right, so she is putting his magic to bad use. So she is, acting in his name, in a sense. She's using Mumbo Jumbo's sort of trademark magic. It's Mumbo's magic that is used badly whenever Gruntilda is doing something. So whenever Gruntilda is doing something bad or evil in these games, she is doing it with Mumbo's magic in some way, with whatever she learned from him. Okay, that's interesting to know as well. Especially considering Mumbo is like a Jinjo, basically. So yeah, we will have to keep that in mind. The manual says, the witch transformed Mumbo's face into a mask of horror to remain that way until the day she's overthrown. Okay, that's funny. So I had it completely wrong. I had this sense that it was Mumbo who, betrayed Gruntilda. Right, so I think Mumbo was betrayed by Gruntilda. Right, she didn't cut his head off exactly, but symbolically it's close to that, right? Symbolically, she transformed his head into a mask that represents a dead head, a cut-off head. So, and again, that's sort of what she did to the Jinjo King statue in the Game Boy Advance game. Chopped off the Jinjo King's head symbolically. And of course, considering all the themes we were talking about in the last video about the male archetype and the female archetype, there seems to be, especially considering there seems to be some sort of Freudian stuff here about the overthrow of male power by the woman, and that being symbolically perceived as something bad. Anyway, so yeah, these are all themes that we'll need to explore more carefully. But especially since Mumbo Jumbo has this little rod with a skull on it. So I don't know. Mumbo already has a sort of some sort of association to libido, right? Magic, I think, is always symbolic of libido in some way, and obviously, and vice versa. Libido is somehow symbolic of magic too. But so, okay, there are a lot of themes here that we'll need to explore. Let's just forget about it for the moment. I'm wasting too much time on this. The whole point of this, why was I talking about this? It was because of the theme of Mumbo being evil. Yes, so Mumbo, right. Shit, okay. So actually, I got everything wrong. I almost feel tempted to restart this video, but I don't think I will. I think it's important to keep all the stuff that we've said anyway. Anyway, it could be helpful. So, Mumbo wasn't evil exactly. Mumbo did belong to what we consider to be Grunty's side, in that Mumbo was aligned with Grunty, but of course Mumbo was aligned with Grunty before Grunty was evil. So this complicates things. And so Mumbo has a special connection, a sort of personal connection to Gruntilda that I don't think the other characters have, and that again sort of the skull, the beheading, which sort of represents death, as if he had been killed and turned into a skeleton. The fact that he's a Jinjo, it all sort of makes me think that he represents evil in some way. Right? Grunty, etc. All these things. So, if that's what's happening, then what is happening with Humbawamba is my question. Is Humbawamba, therefore, the opposite of evil? Does she represent good? Or, if we were to look at it as in death, if Mumbo Jumbo means death, skull, would Humbawamba be life? If, for example, and this is another one, right? If Mumbo Jumbo is the devil, because he is in hell, hailfire, hell, has horns on the skull, all that stuff, if he represents the classic sort of devil, the ruler of hell kind of image, then would Humbawamba be the divine, the ruler of the heavens, right? Would she represent the divine, good, and life, these sorts of things, in opposition to Mumbo Jumbo? Okay, so some of the things that we need to get off our chest right now to continue to carry on. One of them is, I think, and I'm going to throw this out there and see what you think, Globos in this game, these little creatures, seem to have like their hair divided into two golden strands, like these two blobs of golden hair on either side of their head. And the thing is, for some reason, this really reminds me of Tootie, because Tootie also has her hair divided into two, golden like tails. Now, if are they ears though? Fuck. Okay, just a sec. Shit. Okay, I don't know if they're ears or bits of hair. They look like bits of hair, but anyway. So I'm starting to think this is too abstract a route to go down now. So I'm gonna just avoid this topic for a second and move on to something else, which is Mumbo uses mainly fire magic. It seems to me. I'm going to explain why. And Humba then seems to use mainly water magic. And I think that these two again are opposed in these different ways. So for example, we have Mumbo sort of can shoot energy out of his wand, which is already, fire, light kind of stuff. It's not a liquid. It's like an energy, a light. In one instance, even in what's it called, Jolly Roger's Lagoon, he invokes the sun to purify the waters of the lake, something like that. So anyway, I think that Mumbo is more associated to the sun or to light, magic that involves light, fire, energy. Whereas Humba's magic is water-based. It's all about the magical pool. You throw stuff into the magical pool and it is transformed in the waters, right? So the element that is being used is water. That also divides them in some way. It's funny then, because what that means is that Humba's magic is more transformational, I feel, because you jump into the pool and you're transformed. You jump into the pool, usually. The subject. And the subject is transformed into someone else. Into a dinosaur, into a truck, whatever it is. Whereas Mumbo is not so much transformational. First of all, Mumbo rarely deals with the subject in his magic. You are healing other things, it seems to me. Anyway, I'm not sure exactly what that has to do with sun and water, but let's just, I don't know, let's go for it just for a little while longer. So Mumbo heals things, it feels. Mumbo, for example, grabs the broken train and fixes it, heals it. He grabs the infected waters of the lake and heals them, purifies them. He sort of goes around and applies his magic to something that is broken, wounded, infected in some way, and heals it, fixes it. Whereas Humber doesn't fix things, she sort of radically transforms them from one thing to another, from one subject to another subject. In some weird way, this is what happens with Mumbo, because when you go to Mumbo's cabin, you are transformed into Mumbo. The player stops controlling Banjo and Kazooie and begin to control Mumbo. So something very similar to what's happening in Humber's wigwam happens in Mumbo's hut, which is that you stop being yourself and become someone else. It's just that you haven't jumped into a pool of water to achieve it, and it's more sort of meta because it involves the player. The player are suddenly controlling a different creature. It's more sort of obvious in that way that the subject of the player is a different subject. It's Mumbo instead of Banjo-Kazooie. And Humber's wigwam, therefore, the whole theme with water, it's funny because water is so traditionally associated to healing as well, right? A balming kind of soothing thing that you would sit in and you would be healed. Magical waters in myth and folklore are usually associated to this, right? Waters that give you eternal life or that cure all your ills. So there's a healing aspect to water, I think, folklorically, but in Humber's case, it is used in a way that sort of transforms. The healing transforms you. And maybe in Mumbo's case, the transformation heals you. What does this have to do with sun and water and all that? So, again, let's say experimentally that Mumbo is more associated to light and the sun, therefore fire. Like Mumbo is already closer to things like fire and hell in that he's closer to a sort of a fiery energy. It's an energy that comes out from the subject and transforms the object. You transform the broken train, you transform the lake. The subject, the shining sun, usually, the ego, is transforming someone else with their action. Whereas in Humber's case, it is the object, in this case, the lake itself, the waters, that are changing you. You are not changing the waters. So it's not magic that you are doing onto others. It's magic that is done onto you. You become the object in Humber's wigwam, the object of the magic, subjectively being applied on you. Obviously, another conundrum sort of arises here that maybe we need to address, which is that let's say that Mumbo was associated to death and evil and all those things by his association with hell and the skull. Well, in that case, what Mumbo is doing is bringing life back to things. Like Mumbo himself is death, but he brings life to things, right? Makes them healthy. Things that aren't alive anymore. Humber, if then Humber does, by opposition to Mumbo, represent life, then we need to account somehow for the contradiction that she would be bringing death. She does the opposite. She is life, but she brings death. Because you jump into the pool as Banjo-Kazooie and you die as Banjo-Kazooie. You're suddenly someone else. Like, you're no longer the same subject. Your subject is transformed. That means it is death for you. It's just that both of them together somehow prove that life and death are connected. That by dying as a subject, you simply become someone else. And that by living as a subject, you also sort of are connected to death in some way. Okay, sorry for the dodgy nature of this video, but I think we're entering sort of tricky territory in this game, and so I might as well just jump right into it and see what happens. In a sense, I'm jumping into the waters here, right? We're jumping, right, together into Humber's waters and seeing what happens. I think this whole series of analysis needs to be, and is going to be, transformed into something different. It just needs to account for a whole area of this game that hasn't been touched upon yet, and that we're going to have to touch by just jumping into it and seeing what happens and just going with the flow, right? Again, that's another aspect of water. The flow. It's going with the flow. Water flows, and you lose control by jumping into it. Therefore, it takes you to places that you didn't know. That's why, in a sense, it takes you towards death. You're alive, right? Humber is alive, but the living being jumps into death, like jumps into the waters, and is taken to the unknown. The unknown is death, right? The maximum sort of the symbol of the unknown, of whatever is not known by life. So that's what you're taken to. By being alive, you're taken towards death. Mumbo is dead. And somehow by being dead, he has the power to make things grow and live. Obviously, in some sort of basic, let's say, biological sense, we understand this, right? Plants grow from dead matter, from dung, right? Things sort of grow up from manure, from death. So in a sense, Mumbo as death is manure that allows things to grow and therefore to live. Humber as life is someone who represents the flowing of life towards death and therefore towards absolute transformation, total transformation. So that could be something of what's going on here. That's interesting. Let's explore this a little more. Okay, so these are the themes. The thing we haven't touched upon yet at all is God, right? If Humber is God or the divine, as opposed to Mumbo as being somehow connected to evil as well, right? At least the archetypal evil as the devil. Then what does that mean, and why is Humber God, if we were to, go along that route? Well, the first thing I want to look at is bodies again, because I think there's something about their bodies that we need to look at. Obviously, if Mumbo is dead, like if Mumbo is a skeleton, let's look at this, because this opens up a whole sort of can. Mumbo is a skeleton. That sort of means that he doesn't have a body. That's what this game is telling us in respect to Grunty. Grunty is a skeleton, therefore she doesn't have a body, therefore she wants and needs a body somehow. Mumbo, if he is a skeleton symbolically, he is also a lack of body, let's say. And Humber would be a body. That could be something that differentiates them as well, right? That Mumbo is more associated to Bottles, let's say, right? Bottles is also a lack of body. Bottles dies and becomes a ghost. And ghosts are also sort of, spirit. Again, in folklore, ghosts would be associated to spirit and therefore to the type of magic that Mumbo is dealing with. If Mumbo is more sort of spirit than body, more fire than water, then Mumbo brings life to things in the same way that a spirit would bring life to a body. In a sense, what Mumbo is doing, healing things, healing the train, healing the broken stuff that he finds, is he is grabbing dead bodies and bringing them back to life, which is something that we're going to be doing throughout the game. By this I mean that it's what we're going to be doing with bottles. We're going to grab Bottles' body and heal it and fix it and bring it back to life. Right? That's what we're going to do with this game. That's, in a sense, what we're aiming for. Which is really funny, of course, because it is what Grunty is doing. Right? What we are doing is exactly what Grunty is wanting to do. So we're doing the same things. So in this game, I think things become really fractal and really weird because everyone is pursuing the same goals at the same time, and we're all pursuing them in ways that make it seem as if we're all sort of pursuing the same goal. Or, in other words, as if we're all sort of Grunty, Bottles, etc., different fractal aspects of the same sort of story being told through all these characters. So that the final culmination of this game is simultaneously all sorts of different separate events, but that all are representing the same kind of event. So in any case, let's say that, Bottles is a dead body that we are aiming to heal. Grunty is a dead body that is aiming to be healed. The thing then is, like, as we said in the last video, there are a bunch of characters in this game who are women trapped in prison, in cages, and things like that, who need to be liberated. That's strange to me as well, because, could we connect it with this theme? That would be my question right now. The theme of saving Bottles, for example. If saving Bottles is, Bottles right now is in a situation that he doesn't want to be. That's how the game presents it, right? And we need to bring Bottles' spirit back into his body. Would that resonate with the idea of liberating Bottles from death and bringing him back to life? What would that mean exactly? Right? In what way would the prison archetype work here? Because, of course, we can see the prison archetype, I think, two ways in this sort of puzzle. The two sort of dialectical ways would be to say that death is the prison, somehow, right? That spirit, being a ghost, is the prison, and being incarnated in a body is liberation from that limbo prison state of being a ghost, which is what we want for Bottles. But the other view, obviously, is what is being said in the rest of the game, which is that the body is somehow a prison and one liberates oneself from the body by becoming a spirit, which would be the more like traditionally religious perspective of this thing. I think that the cool thing about this game is that it connects both sides. I think both things are being said at the same time by the game, let's say. And so that opens the question of, okay, in what way is it being said at the same time? Could it be that on the one side of the spectrum, we have bodies that are prisons? So let's say, again, the body is a material condition, let's say. It's a series of material conditions, right? You can move in this sort of way. You can do these sorts of things, right? Humber teaches you this. Let's look at this. Let's remember this. This is what Humber teaches you, that by being different bodies, you can do different things. By being a truck, you can access different areas of Witchy World. By being a dinosaur, you can access different areas. You can do different things. You have different abilities. You have a different size, a different way of doing things. So different bodies can suddenly could have all sorts of different kinds of freedom. Before, you didn't have the freedom to jump everywhere you wanted, but suddenly you become a sort of body that can jump a lot and you can go anywhere. You become a body that can swim underwater, and suddenly you're free to explore the depths of the ocean, right? So there are different kinds of limits. You're limited. You can't explore the ocean. You're limited. You can't explore the air. But by becoming different bodies, by being in different material conditions, you can suddenly be free to do other things, right? So Humber is teaching you this again and again. By transforming into different bodies, you're seeing for yourself that being a different body is not just a minor event. It completely transforms your relationship to your environment, relationship to, it's not just who you are, it's what you can do. Yeah, your relationship to yourself and your environment, let's say, and to your freedom. Okay, sure. So it also makes you think, well, right, Humber, in a sense, is teaching us what Grunty wants to achieve. You can somehow maybe get an inkling of what is happening at the symbolic level with Grunty's quest. Grunty wants to be a different body. Grunty wants different material conditions. Why? Because different material conditions would give her different kinds of freedom to do the sorts of things that her spirit, let's say, her will, wants to do. Her will, her spirit, wants to do all sorts of different things that it can't do because it's a skeleton, right? Or because it's a robot, or because it's a different kind of body that what she wants to be, right? Her material conditions limit her spirit's freedom. So her material condition, her body, is a prison to the kind of freedom that she is like destined to have, you could say, right? Okay, so that's interesting. In that picture then, of course, the prison is the body. And you may see Grunty as a villain and be like, but Grunty is has all these sort of villainous aspects to her that seem to suggest that it is foolish of her to want a different body. Humber, however, again shows that in fact there is something very necessary in having a different body and having different material conditions, right? And especially when you combine it with all the themes of like child rearing and domestic care and all the sort of limiting material conditions that one would be in, being a woman in the sort of traditions of the society in which this game was created, let's say, and in the society of most of the people who would be playing this game would be aware of this. So I think that's partly what is being said here. And again, maybe why Grunty is presented as a villain, because Grunty therefore represents like the breaking down of the kind of structures of power that have allowed men to have more material control and more material power, which therefore allow them more spiritual freedom in some way. Right. Okay, so that's one thing. However, I think it's also like so let's look at it the other way around. There is on the one hand the idea that the body is the prison. And that's what Humber is teaching us. However, there is also Bottles, right? Again, Bottles and Grunty, therefore, are on opposite sides of the spectrum. Grunty wants to be a different body. Bottles has become a different body. He used to be a flesh and bones body. Now he is a spirit ghost body. He's been transformed. He's died. He's been transformed into a different body. But he would like to be same old Bottles. That's what he wants. his will, his spirit, the freedom he craves is the freedom to be himself as he always was. And just whatever, keep on meeting up with his friends and being with his family or whatever, right? Excuse me. So, to wrap this up, because there's not much else to say here, but Bottles is trapped in a prison that is the other way around. In some way. Because, of course, you could say the ghost is a different body from the flesh body, and they're both just material conditions of different kinds. But I think that because the ghost tends to represent spirit, and in the context of what this game is trying to do, I think that what is being said is that the limiting condition here is the spirit or the will, and that therefore what's limiting Bottles' freedom now is not his material conditions. Like, symbolically, that could be one way of reading it, because of course materially you could just read it in a completely material way and say, well, Bottles is dead. That obviously affects his freedom because he can't move his body around. So he needs materially a different body, a body that is alive, in order to live freely as he would want to and move around. But let's take it symbolically. Symbolically, it would mean that Bottles is limited simply by his spirit. Like, materially, let's imagine that materially he has the kind of material conditions that allow him to do more or less what he wants to do. The kind of, he has the kind of material environment and a sort of support system basically that allows him to do all sorts of things. He plays football with his son. He has a house. He lives in a house. He has friends. He has food. I don't know, these sorts of things, right? Has a family. This sort of traditional idea of a network of material support. But, and yet, there seems to be an idea of unfreedom. Could this have something to do with him being limited by his ideas, by his thinking, by his will, by his spirit, by whatever it is that he wants, right? In some way, you could say maybe that to be limited by the spirit instead of the material conditions, by the spiritual conditions, is to have a certain kind of psychological and emotional makeup that prevents you from even being or having access to what it is that you want, right? If you're not in contact with, that's a psychoanalytic thing, if you're not in contact with what you want, then you're not going to be able to get it. No matter how rich you are, you can be the richest person in the world and have all the material power in the world, but if you're not in touch in some way, if you're not psychologically healed, if you're physically healed, you're physically healthy, but you're not psychologically healthy, then you won't have access to all the sorts of desires and ideas and emotions that could allow you to do the things that you want to do, right? You're not even in touch with the things that you want to do and how to do them and all of that. So that might be more what Bottles wants. I'm going to wager that that's more or less what's happening. And that these at least are some of the themes that I think we need to explore. There is a sort of a limitation here that's wanting to be encountered and dealt with, and yeah, I don't know. I think this game is trying to deal with it, and we'll see. I don't know. We'll keep on exploring it. So I think there isn't much more to say. So, okay, yeah, that's probably good enough. Thanks. See ya.